Afternoon. I'm Director of Training and Skills at the Academy, which means that the labour market, what's happening in the skills world, is really important to me. And I'm really always enjoy talking to Neil. And Neil's here to give us an update on what that looks like. We've had some significant changes over the last 2 years with COVID, Brexit, all sorts of things. Be really keen to see what that impact looks like today and also forward thinking. So Neil, I'm going to hand over Neil Carberry, who's the Chief Exec of Recruitment and Employment Confederation. And I'll leave you to tell us all about where we are right now and where we're going, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, and good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to hop over the sectoral fence and speak to our friends at the BESA, and thank you for the invite to come and speak at your national conference today. I've already heard that you've had a cracking couple of days. This presentation, I'm basically going to try and read the runes on what we can see in the labour market right now, how it affects the sector, and maybe what I'd expect companies in the sector to want to be thinking about right now. I think the way to view this is a message from the people who are out there trying to fill all those vacancies right now and what we're seeing, but also we're applying some of our own REC research to this. So I'll probably speak for about 15-20 minutes and then plenty of time to pick up on any questions or points of clarification that people want. So what does the new labour market mean for us? It's quite provocative to talk about a new labour market, but I think it is quite important. For those of you who don't know us at the REC or me, I'm Chief Executive of the REC. We are the professional body for recruiters, both in-house and in agency. So we have 3,300 agency members, but we also have several thousand individual members as a professional body, and they work both within agencies and in companies like your own as recruiters and talent acquisition specialists. And later on in the presentation, you'll see some shorthand, and where you see TA, I mean talent acquisition, in-house recruiters. I'm a member of the council at ACAS, and I'm a recovering low pay commissioner. I just spent 7 years on the commission until this summer. But most importantly, I've spent 20 years looking at the UK labour market, both at the REC and at the CBI, and as a recruiter myself before that. And if you want to get in touch or discuss any issues, my best way in is always on Twitter at REC Neil. So that's me. That's where I'm coming from in giving this presentation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to gently work through what we think we're seeing in the labour market now and what it means for us going forward. So let's be clear. We have rarely seen a labour market like this. And you can see here on the graph on this slide just what a bounce the labour market has had over the last year or so. The tail line, the upper line here, is companies' confidence in hiring for their own businesses. That is always more positive than their general economic outlook. And that is a classic British thing. You know, we're doing okay. I can see that. It's close at hand. I'm not so sure about those guys over there, though. But what's really telling is we're seeing kind of decade highs on willingness to hire for your own business, and actually a really positive economic outlook as well. Above the horizontal axis is that sentiment is improving, and below the horizontal axis, sentiment is getting worse. As you can see, things were a bit fizzier a month or two ago than they are now. They're still pretty fizzy, but you'd expect in the face of some of the winter uncertainties that we have right now about supply chains and around the position of the virus, the heat would come out a little bit, and we're just beginning to see that. But generally speaking, this is a picture of a labour market where almost every company is trying to hire across almost every sector. And of course, what does that do? It drives a shortage in the labour market. And you've heard about drivers and about care staff and to some extent other sectors, hospitality, particularly pieces of construction, are particularly hot as well. But actually, every sector is telling a similar sort of story here. And of course, what it's doing is it's pushing up starting rates. So we're seeing both temporary wages and permanent salaries for new jobs beginning to rise. There's a bit of a tension here because anecdotally, we're not quite seeing the same in thinking about existing staff. So the settlements outlook for pay rounds for existing staff is not as high paced, and I think there's potential for some industrial conflict there if you think about the announcement today from the bank that they're expecting to see inflation hit 5% in the early part of next year, just when, of course, many companies are thinking about a pay round. So demand is short for people right now. That is pushing up starting rates, and it's making it more difficult for our members to find the candidates that you need. And you can see that in the staff availability index there on the other graph on this slide. I think it is really important to labour the point I've already made, though, across permanent and temporary vacancies, every sector is up now in the way that every sector was down in early 2020. The big kind of secular changes that we're seeing in our economy, the move to IT, the move away from high street retail, that's obviously there. Retail's up a bit less than other sectors, and it was down a bit more than other sectors last year. But the macro trend of everybody being in the market sits across all of these sectors. So it's a really, really candidate-focused market right now, and that's all the more true now that we know that the hypothesis that a few of us had, that most people who were still on furlough were working elsewhere, seems to be coming true. There hasn't been a big lot of candidates this month or over the past month as furlough has ended, and because of that, what we're seeing is a lot of hiring activity. So we measure job adverts. There are over 200,000 new job ads a week at the moment. We're seeing around 2.3 million active postings in the UK labour market right now. Remember that there are only 30 million employees. That is an enormous amount of demand. And I think it's really important to emphasise that it's not impossible to hire right now. We think more people started a new job in Britain last month than any month in British history. More hiring is going on than ever before. It's just that demand is so much higher. And we're seeing that in what our members are reporting back. Every REC member is concerned about labour shortages, and 97% of them say it's taking longer to fill vacancies. Half of that 97% are telling us it's taking more than a month. So that's that, and that kind of constrains ability to take on work, constrains, puts inflation into the system. Potentially, it's not very sustainable for the medium to long term. And our data across the country shows that there is a balance issue. I think the Southeast is always heavily affected by labour shortages. It's a high-cost part of the country. It came out highest in our recent survey on where the shortages were. But I draw your attention to the Northwest as well. We definitely see now emerging in our data, and there's some new data coming tomorrow from the REC that emphasises this, that along the M62 corridor is also getting very sharply tight across most sectors right now. So far, I've sort of built out what I think you've probably picked up from your own reading and thinking about what's going on in the jobs market right now. It's really hot. Most companies are hiring to some extent. The big question is how do we understand all this? What does it mean? Is it a new labour market, or is this just what happens in economies where you switch them off for a year and then you switch them back on? So this is my caveat. Anyone who tells you they know precisely what will be happening in the British labour market a year from now is either a fool or a liar. But what we can do is we can look at some of the trends and try and work out what sensible companies should be doing right now. And as we drive past it, this is my favourite thing that's happened in the press with me since I joined the REC, because as you can see in this copy of Metro, the REC is supporting ABBA on the front cover, which is a sign that the labour market is big news at the moment, and also that my taste in 70s shirts hasn't gone unnoticed. So what is our analysis of what's going on now? Well, there are definitely some reasons to believe that some of this shortage is cyclical. It's about switching the economy back on. If I talk to my colleagues in sister federations to the REC, in other similar economies, big, large-scale vaccination program delivered, relatively free and free labour market in terms of flexibility, we are definitely seeing there some similar sorts of shortage narratives. You might have seen the US narrative on this, probably 6 to 8 weeks ahead of ours, actually. There are a few reasons for that. One, the economy's changed shape in the recession, and unemployment and opportunities don't just net off. People need to retrain, they need time to move across to find the new opportunities. That will take time to clear. Two, there are Brexit tensions in the system, as you know yourselves from things like supply of material for installation. There are changes that we've had to adopt. Some of that will just take time to play through the system. We also think that many workers are still holding themselves back from changing job, partially perhaps because they just want to see the recovery bed down a bit more. Maybe they felt reasonably well supported by their employer over the course of the course of the pandemic. There are a number of reasons why people might hold back. My favourite example of this is, if my daughter was a little older and we lived in Cornwall, and in normal summers she would work in a local restaurant in the evenings during the tourist rush, would I want her to have done it this summer? Possibly not. So there are reasons why the pandemic fading might not have played through the system quite yet. So there are some fundamental short-term things that mean that this crisis is particularly sharp now. But I don't think you can explain all of it. And if you take one message from what I'm talking about today, it's the bold line on this slide. The tight labour market is here to stay, even if this crisis of hiring right now is not. Because what we're seeing is the crisis exposing some long-term and fundamental weaknesses that the UK labour market has around skill shortages, around issues like the loss of, we think, maybe 1 million workers from the labour force over the course of the last year. Once you take the combination of a significant move to retirement by older workers, younger people staying in education a bit longer, and the loss of some workers to Brexit. And we're definitely seeing not just fewer workers coming in from Europe, but some of the workers with settled status starting to float away. So it's not just the flow of workers from Union, it's the stock of workers we already had. And that, again, is driving some of the tightness. On the demographic point, I think this is really important for a lot of sectors, particularly highly skilled trade sectors like your own. Many sectors have seen a gentle increase in the average age of the workforce over the last 5 to 10 years, and it's been cushioned by the ending of the normal retirement age, people working a bit longer. The baby boom generation is enormous, and as they retire, they are being replaced in the labour market by smaller generations. The one little stat I use to emphasise this is that there were 50% more babies born in the United Kingdom in 1964 than in 1977. So that demographic pressure on labour shortage is also coming down the pipe. And that's why I say, yes, absolutely, we'll get used to the changes that Brexit's brought. We'll get over the pandemic. But the idea that a tight labour market is not here for at least the next decade or two, I'm afraid is for the birds. And that is a big challenge to corporates. So the obvious question is, what can we do? And these next few slides really just emphasize one or two things that I think are important, hopefully kickstarters for your thinking internally on where you might put your emphasis. If this was a live session, I'd ask you, do you know where this bridge is? But as it's not, I'll tell you. This is the bridge over the Columbia River, and the photo is taken from the perspective of Astoria, Oregon, and on the other side is Washington State. Astoria, by the way, is where the film The Goonies was filmed. The interesting thing about this bridge is it it has to adapt to where it is and what it's doing. So the Columbia River is a huge river. The Port of Portland is upstream of Astoria, so you have to have a bit of the bridge that's exceptionally high to let shipping underneath. But the distance across the river is over 4.5 miles, and it didn't make construction sense or safety sense to have the bridge at that height all the way across. And as you can see, it drops down pretty quickly after the shipping lane. This is a tortured analogy for the fact that if you want to keep doing what you've been doing in terms of bringing people in, you might find you have to adapt quite a lot in terms of how people's work is scheduled, how greater individualism in your relationships with people, real challenge in getting managerial skill sets right to get that offer to employees into the right place, and thinking again about, well, how much of your essential list of requirements is really essential. There's something there about your talent acquisition people having the ability to challenge into the business, and this is a bit of a theme for me, which is you can't leave this to HR. This is a significant commercial challenge to every business in the UK, particularly in skilled sectors. And getting the line to think about what the workforce plan is and how to structure it is going to be super important. If you stay downstream like this, you will have to adapt what you do. The market will just force it. Where you have perhaps greater freedom is if you can get upstream. This is also the Columbia River in British Columbia, Canada. And as you can see, you can just about forward it here. There's two bits to this. One, just deciding what the offer is from the boardroom isn't going to do it. Some of it is about listening to what the workforce and the potential workforce want. So it's about focusing on your employment relations. That will help you shape what your value proposition to new staff will be, and help you adopt a more strategic planning framework for workforce. That needs to involve your senior staff. And what do I mean when I talk about a more strategic planning framework? Well, for me, we think that commercially getting your staffing right is an enormous difference maker for businesses. Our work last year, Recruitment and Recovery, which is about all good recruitment, it's not just about what the agency sector does, suggests that getting recruitment right contributes about 86 billion to the gross value added of the UK economy. Getting recruitment wrong is highly costly. Turnover is no one's friend. And there are high road and low road routes available to reacting to the kind of pressure that we're under now. And my encouragement would be for every business to think about how you adopt a high road route. Getting retention right, getting the offer right, and viewing how you recruit as part of your retention strategy is really important. That's where I would argue our members can help in terms of shaping an understanding of the market and how to do things well. But in principle, I'd encourage you to think about these three circles. What are you going to buy? As in, what are you going to go out and hire as you always have? And how are you going to buy it? What are you going to borrow? Now, that might be contractor self-employment. That might be agency. There are a range of options, but actively choose what you're going to borrow and why you're going to borrow. And what are you going to grow? And I think what you're going to grow is particularly important. So when chief executives told us for that work that was on the previous slide that people were second only to the quality of their product in terms of the differentiation that it makes in their business, I'm afraid I, as someone who worked for the CBI for 15 years representing businesses in all sectors, but now has a slightly freer hand working for recruiters, think that's great. When are you going to behave like it? Because too many businesses leave it all to HR and then attempt to buy people in as though they're buying paper clips. It's not procurement. The Declaration of Philadelphia in 1944, the heights of the Second World War, the Allies got together and set out their plan for post-war social relations. And it's very clear. Labour's not a commodity. You don't buy it like a commodity. It's about understanding what the workforce needs and how to attract people in. Critical part of that is the grow piece. How do you train? especially if you take into account the demographic challenge that I identified earlier. Now, my view, I'm fundamentally an optimist about the UK labour market. It always performs. And so we can take this on. But the critical thing is getting your HR and talent advisory people talking to the line and dealing with your workforce planning as a serious commercial issue. Because it is going to be, because of the nature of this labour market as it develops over the next few years. But yeah, as I said, I'm an optimist. I absolutely think that this is quite a moment for workforce in the sector, because there's probably enough pressure in the system now that we can do some big and exciting new things in companies and in terms, Helen, of the work that you're doing with BESA.
That was really interesting, Neil. I think a couple of things I would really like to ask you about is that ageing piece. It's quite interesting. We were always saying we've got an aging workforce and a skills gap. And I would like to say, from our sector perspective, how do you think we need to grab that limited workforce? What do you think we need to do as a strategy for that?
So I think one of the challenges with this has been that a lot of the focus has been on apprenticeships, whoever you are. And apprenticeships are really good and useful and important, but there are other things we can do. There are two big pools of labour, I think, that are available and are undermined. One is youth unemployment is still too high almost everywhere in the UK, and there is an opportunity there to bring people into the industry in early career. The critical thing is you need to approach them differently. And in wherever you are in the country, there are people doing good work to try and build links between schools and colleges and industry. So just find who's doing the good work locally to you, and you might have to give a bit of your time to that, but I think it pays returns. The other bit, and I think this is a bit more complex, is retraining. I remember sitting in a meeting in my CBI days, and I think Jenny House of BESA might have been in the same meeting because we were both working at the CBI at the time, where Justine King made a point, which was essentially, it's fine for the cabinet to go and have a meeting at Rolls Royce twice a year, but everyone works for me and Terry Leahy. And what he meant was that the scale of employment in supermarkets was enormous. Well, it's not going to be enormous forever. So there is a big stock of mid-career workers who have been doing customer-facing things who are facing dislocation over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Those people are fundamentally customer service focused and trainable. And so those two things, what can we do with growing people coming into the sector mid-career, and what can we do with attracting young people early career, but dealing with them separately, because the path to getting them on board will be very different.
Thank you. The other thing I think that we have a challenge with is that as an industry, as a sector, we actually, it's a real split in terms of those that are subcontractors as opposed to direct employed. Do you see that changing at all in the future?
Well, I think this is interesting. There are a couple of factors here. Look, we're already seeing in this shortage time more of a push to of people trying to use self-employed. So some of the because of the tightness of the labour market, maybe some of the established practices in parts of sectors like your own has changed a little bit. More push to just get people in who can do the job for a bit, that borough circle. My view would be that there is capacity in the labour market for an employed model if firms get it right. I think in the long term, government will remain interventionist. I mean, look at the budget last week. This is not a laissez-faire government in terms of tax, and it's not going to be a laissez-faire government in terms of regulation. So the single enforcement body, when it comes along, I'm expecting to have some teeth, and I think it will look at things like self-employed models. So I think making sure that when you're deciding between that borrow and that buy and grow balance, you're aware that both bits of that are going to face some level of regulation over the next couple of years.
Interesting. The other challenge around that borrow model is what level their qualifications and skills are at, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that that's absolutely critical. Which is one of the when I'm feeling sort of wistful. I mentioned the '70s in the presentation. I'd say in many ways, British Steel, British Rail, the Coal Board, and British Leyland were basket cases of organisations. But what they were was a hell of a good set of industrial training schools, and they pretty much kept British engineering going for a long time. Employed models do that. Self-employed models do not do it as well. And I think if you're thinking structurally about the sector, where that training takes place feels to me a big, important sectoral discussion. But you can't outsource it to BESA. It's also about what companies themselves do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think particularly with the challenges of net zero coming and the need to upskill as we go, that's
A
something we really
great
need to look at.
great example of this, one of my board directors at the REC runs a company called CERT, that they are already using a hire, train, deploy model, which some of our members do in high demand, stable demand sectors like IT and green tech. You hire some young people, you give them the training, and then you deploy them to clients like many of your members. When government announced all that funding for heat pumps, over 24, 48 hours, he took about 1,000 requests for job vacancies for heat pump engineers. Now, many of you will know there's no such thing as a heat pump engineer. What there is a labourer, a gas guy, and an electricity guy. And actually, for most of the week, the gas guy and the electricity guy are watching the labourer install the heat pump. We don't have a skill set around that. And that's where I think cohesion between government and businesses, but actually within sectors on the skills needs of net zero is going to be super important. Because actually, if there's demand for 1,000 people with a qualification that doesn't exist yet, the answer is make the qualification.
And I guess that is where we come in, is that making of that qualification. One final question. You mentioned about upstream and the need for it to go further than HR. Is this the one thing you wanted to take away today?
Yeah, look, I just think that people are our greatest asset is a really easy thing to say. And I think we don't live in a time where it can just be talking the talk. I think the one measure I'd like in all my presentation for all sectors is that you're going to have to walk the walk on this, because the labour market is tight. And it's not just that supply is low. I think we are getting clear signals from the workforce that they want to be aligned with the purpose of what their organisation is doing, and they want the people practice to be aligned with the commercials of the business. So in terms of one thing to take away, it's absolutely your people strategy is a part of your commercial plan, and it needs to be owned by your board.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Neil. Thank you so much indeed for your time today. I think we've learnt an awful lot. I just hope that we put it all into practice, and certainly some of the things that we can build into the BESA strategy, I think, in terms of skills and the development that we need to do with people, I think is fundamental for everything we need to do moving forward. So thank you again.
Thanks, Helen.